So today we're going to dive into MIDI out from virtual instruments. So again, something we haven't really covered before. MIDI out can, produce some interesting effects for your digital performer productions. And so we're going to use it as an opportunity today to talk about other facets of MIDI tracks and MIDI channels. So it's today's kind of MIDI channel day, and then more specifically, MIDI out from VST3s. That's what we're going to cover. So we're going to start. I've got different examples of things to kind of review. This is, for all of us, it's just good to remember how things kind of connect. And so we're in an empty chunk. We're going to switch over here into multi-channel. So let me just switch over here. I'm going to play enable that sequence. And I do love using chunks when I'm doing presentations, or if I'm working on a film score or working on songs and using different versions of songs. It's so nice to have this chunks approach. So let's start off with something pretty simple, which is I have Workstation instantiated as a VI. I think this is the AU version. Remember, on the Mac, you have the choice of using the AU or the VST or VST3 versions, and they can all run together, which is kind of nice. On the Windows, obviously, it's VST. That's the only format, and MAS, MOTU audio system plugins. So we have just a good old-fashioned MIDI track that's assigned to Workstation. So here it is. Sometimes, you guys will run a combined instrument track for a piano, a drum set, something that's a single instance, a single sound. And sometimes you guys will run, obviously, something multi-timbral, right? You'll have a Contact with 16 channels, or a Falcon, or an Omnisphere, or something like that. So when it comes to, just an old-fashioned MIDI track, what's interesting here is if I have multi-record is turned off. So whenever I'm starting to record MIDI tracks, I can only record one input at a time, one channel at a time. And you can see that it's going to use any device in my studio. So in my audio MIDI setup, I could have 12 devices connected. They could be through a MIDI interface. They could be separate MIDI devices that connect USB. So things like that, or even stuff that connects Bluetooth. Right? There's all these different ways now that MIDI devices can connect to your system and be seen through MIDI hardware, USB, Bluetooth, things like that. Now look at this. Let's say in my case, my M32 that Chris Peck, arranged for me to get, which is great. I love it. It's sitting on my desk and it connects through USB. Whatever the transmit channel is set to. Okay. Now, if I go down to complete control application, it's a standalone app, I can tell the transmit channel to be something other than 1. It can be any channel 1 through 16. Right now, it's set to channel 1. No matter what the channel is that it's transmitting on. It's funny, we don't always think about our transmit channel, but we should really, especially when it comes to virtual instrument, combined instrument tracks. So it's coming in on whatever channel it's coming in, but I've specified that I'm using Workstation channel 1. So no matter what the input device is, the output is always going back to Workstation channel 1. Always. And that's just a simple thing. No matter what the input channel, it's always going back. But if I take Workstation here and I say any, now I have to kind of know, really, what the input channel is coming. So the transmit channel on your controller, whatever that is, Kurzweil, Yamaha, Roland, Korg, whatever that is, Arturia, what's it sending on? Because that's what channel the event is going to get recorded. It's going to get tagged. Every MIDI note is going to get tagged with that MIDI channel. So now that when I say any, now, of course, what's nice about that, by the way, is that it's not going to be channel 1. It's going to be any of all, any channel between 1 and 16. So this is cool. Like as of DP11, we added the ability to have multiple channels per MIDI track. So any MIDI track can have up to 16 channels. So that's such a simple little thing, but I just want to make sure you guys understand that most of the time, most of us are just kind of thinking, well, I don't know what channel is coming in, but I know I want to send it to channel 1, but you might set it to any. And so in the case of, actually something like a virtual instrument. Now check this out. I'm still in single channel. I'm not in multi-record. I moved now into record for the actual combined instrument track, or just think of it as an instrument track. I kind of use the word combined, because remember that the audio and the MIDI are combined into the one track. So, but what's interesting, notice that I can't set the output, right? The MIDI track, if I go up into here, is there any place that I can find what that's MPE? This is the protocol settings. A virtual instrument track doesn't have a place where I can tell it it's channel 1, it's channel 2, it's channel 3. It's always speaking all 16 channels. It always is. A virtual instrument is able to transmit on all 16 channels. So again, now you're thinking, okay, what's my transmit channel? So this is something that, you'll find in the manual. And then that way, when you're playing a virtual instrument, you've got the right MIDI channel. And so what's cool about the idea of having multiple MIDI channels is that when you go into the MIDI editor, and I have got one MIDI track right here. This is one combined MIDI track. And I have here, of course, I'm zooming here, command arrow keys to zoom. I have a performance here that is just a very simple little thing. But in fact, what do we have here? What are we actually hearing? Inside Workstation, I have a piano, a music box, and we've got these other elements loaded in here, all on separate MIDI channels. Remember, sometimes you will just go up here to main and you can add and look at your various parts and you can see the key maps and turn on reverbs and things like that. And you all have Workstation, of course. On the, excuse me, on the multi side, of course, we can set up our individual channels. We can create stacks. Remember, you can just change the assignments for any of the actual channels. But in fact, now when I come in here, I take any of the events and you can see in the event info strip here that it shows me that this C5 is on MIDI channel 1 at a velocity of 75. Why is this pink? Why does it do that over here? Remember, over here in the track selector, we can view our track, but we can also come and open up our channel selector. The channel selector is going to break down any of the MIDI channels that are being used. So we can see all of our MIDI tracks. We can see what channels of each MIDI tracks are being used. And in this case, it shows me, and you can change the colors over here. You're able to do that. You can hide and view those separate MIDI tracks, or excuse me, notes that are assigned to that channel. And so you can see here that this is, in fact, channel 2. What's this over here, this orange? This is channel 3. So this is a way that, a lot of you are starting to work now, where you'll have a Spitfire instance and you'll have a violin part. One track, it views a certain way in the QuickScribe window. It's all one track, and yet it's playing different articulations. So this is a nice way to work, being able to have one track with multiple channels and viewing those channels individually by color and editing them and doing all your controller data. And that works really well. And so that's something that you want to think about as the way you work. And so now as we think about, okay, what about multi-channel MIDI tracks? Let's look at that here for a minute, now that we've kind of broken that down. And by the way, just a quick point I didn't mention, which I need to go back into, lassoing or highlighting individual notes and going up to region to change their MIDI channel assignment. So you can do it like this. You could come up here and say, well, I'm going to highlight this note and I'll just type in number 3 for channel 3. But obviously you're working across huge sections of your score or whatever it might be. And you're saying, okay, I want these notes right here, those first 3 notes. I go up here and you can set up, of course, a shortcut, a command to change MIDI channel and say, hey, these guys need to go to 3 and so on and so forth. Undo, save. Cool. So it's very easy to work that way and use that region menu to change the channel assignment. So what about multi-record? Let's go back to the easy one here, which is we'll take this out of record. And so now you're thinking, okay, I'd like to be able to record on multiple MIDI channels at the same time. And I want to use, and I'll show you some different examples of that. So right now, of course, under Studio, this is where you can turn on here, multi-record. Once you're in multi-record, now, of course, it shows you, you have to choose. Sometimes it'll just choose the most generic topmost device, or even something like network or something you're probably like, I'm not going to use that. Why is it using that? Well, you'll want to come in here. And it's interesting, depending on the device that's connected to your computer, it might not show up as, it might show up as an unconfigured port. I don't know why and how that differentiates with Digital Performer, but that's the case currently. So if I want the M32, which I do, I want to be able to play multiple tracks, I have to come in here and click, and then I can assign it to any of these channels. So I can be any channel coming from the M32 or a very specific MIDI channel. So now that I'm in multi-record, of course, I can play. And of course, I can record on the separate MIDI track, or I can record right onto the actual virtual instrument track. It's interesting, right now, I'm doubling. I'm recording on the MIDI track assigned to Workstation, and I'm recording on the Workstation, which is channel 1. So that's why I'm doubling up. So you want to be careful with that. You don't necessarily always want to record on, one or the other, but probably not both you know? So that's something you want to think about. But to illustrate, okay, so now that you understand, obviously that's a simple basic concept here. We open up this folder here called M32 stack. So all I've done in this example is created these 4 separate MIDI tracks assigned here to workstation channel 1, 2, 3, 4. I can put these into play. Now I can arm these all at the same time. Now in this case, obviously in this studio right now, there's just one input device. But in fact, in your studio, you've got whatever, 10 devices, or you've got, let's say you and a friend are playing kind of dueling piano keyboards. You know, you're going to play kind of Rhodes and he or she's going to play a organ part or whatever. And you're recording, obviously, multi-record, and this device is, you know, the Korg, and this is the Roland, and so on and so forth, and every channel is assigned to a unique separate input. In this case, what's cool, by the way, is if I hit chords here, so I'm playing these, and, you know, I can mute this channel here, or we can just go out here to bar 5. If I hit record, so I've recorded a stack, essentially, right? That same input channel is going to all output devices, all output channels at the same time. And you never know. Maybe you're going to do a piano strings thing, you know, kind of a John Tesh thing. Who knows? Like where you want to get a string piano layer and you want to be able to play a stack. You know, you could do it within workstation. Remember that it's very easy to say these are all channel 1 and that's your stack and it's on one track. What's the benefit of having it broken out like this? I mean, it's nice that you can come in here and edit these and change notes and just do more of an orchestration of these parts, but you can record them all at the same time. So that's such a simple little thing. And I know you guys, this is probably somewhat boring, but we're going to get through it very quickly. We're going to move on. But now to illustrate actually having different channels and different devices as inputs, let's use IAC. So remember now, I have to say that the IAC, there isn't really an equivalent of this on the Windows side. There are ways to send MIDI on Windows systems between devices, and I wish I was more versed in it. We'll have to come back around to that. You know, Matt Batson at MOTU is one of our in-house Windows experts, and maybe we'll have to just get Matt back here before you know it and talk a little bit about routing and MIDI and stuff like that on the Windows side. But let's open this up. I mean, we can close this stack here. We can take it out of play and open this up. So to illustrate my next example, I'm going to come down here and we're going to open up, of course, our beloved Benoit Wiedemann, who is a part of our community, developed an app a while back called Splitter. And this is free. You guys can put a link to it. And we've covered it a couple times. And we're not going to get deeply into it. But it's a really cool concept because it's easy. And it'll help me illustrate what we're going to do with this to show this multi-record here with MIDI. So I open up Splitter, it runs standalone, and I have my input channel from my device. And all this app does, and it's elegant and it's in simplicity, is I turn on these 4 channels and I set basically the range. So think of it as you're looking down at your keyboard and I've got, okay, my channel 1 is the upper register. You might think the opposite. Maybe in your world, channel 1 is the low range, whatever. This is the way that mine's set up. So the low octave here, and you can see, by the way, if these ranges overlap, then you would be recording on the same channel. So these don't really overlap because you can see C to B2, C3 to B3, and so on and so forth. And this looks like it just obviously goes kind of extends into the higher register all the way up. But when I play these notes from my input channel, it's this little Splitter app is saying, okay, you're going to, based on your range, you're going to now be sent out through IAC, inter-application communication. That's the IAC bus is built into the macOS. In fact, if you go into AMS, just make sure that it's enabled. Make sure that Zoom is out of the way. So I go into AMS, and you'll see here that I have the IAC here. It's turned on, IAC driver. If I double click on it, by the way, I could take the device offline, but it's currently active on my system and I use it. So I'll quit AMS, and you can see other floating devices in my studio. I have a little fast lane because my V drum set is old enough that it's not USB. It connects through MIDI cables. But other things that float in your orbit here, you see, my different M series interfaces are offline currently, and so on and so forth. But the Splitter app, now that it's active and it's running, if I open up this folder, I have these different channels assigned. So since multi-record is turned on, whatever comes out of the splitter application, so let's just kind of look at this together here. I play in the low register, it comes out as channel 4, and so on and so forth. Now, it's nice in here, he did some cool things where you can transpose the different registers. You can actually change whatever MIDI channels you want them to be, you know, all the way up. And so you would think about that. You can set, obviously, what the middle C reference is. And then, of course, you can, what's nice is that you can pass through notes if you're doing things like key switches in a lower register. You might say, well, I'm not really thinking like that. I'd like all the notes to go through. But maybe when you're film scoring and you have certain articulations, you don't want that to be an issue. So you're saying, well, I think the top note of my key switch is this particular note, and you'll set this range and turn this on. So it's pretty elegant. It's simple. There's nothing really to it, and it works quite well. But to show this example now, if I come up here and I hit record, and we don't need the click, obviously. So I'm just going to play, switching different octaves here. So I was just kind of jumping on the M. I had to actually hit the octave button to drop it an octave so I could play. But now it's actually each of those channels from one keyboard. One keyboard is sending that signal into Splitter. Splitter's sending out 4 different channels to the IAC bus. They're coming into Digital Performer and then going to their corresponding workstation channel. So this is cool. Like this works pretty well. And this is a way to illustrate 2 things. It's showing you that you can record on multiple channels at the same time, but it's also showing you that, you know, this really nice little app Splitter might come in handy when you're doing, you know, stacks, layers, composing. You know, there's obviously very important reasons why you're sitting at the keyboard and you're playing these kind of bass lines, and those are going to channel 1, and you're playing kind of the upper stab brass parts or whatever it is on separate channels. But this illustrates this. Now, what if we take these out of record, and what if we go up here to workstation and we put this into IAC Any? So if we go up here, we'll park at bar 15 or whatever. We can kind of go a little bit past here and save. If I set the workstation input to IAC Any, now based on the register that I'm playing, so this is cool. That this is a good illustration of we have one combined instrument track. And remember, we can't even tell it what channel to play. It'll play all 16 channels. How do I know which channel it's playing? It's from the input device. What's the input device? It's coming from IAC through Splitter. Splitter's taking my M32 channel 1 and splitting it 4 ways. So, you know, if there's questions, Adam, I'm sure this is all pretty basic, but now's a good time for those questions.
You're doing great.
Okay, excellent. So this is all kind of laying the groundwork in a way for our next example, which is something interesting. Again, this is sort of, I don't know who's going to want to use this example, but it is, in fact, something that I discovered about Digital Performer. So let's go over here into something I called IAC Loopback. And let me switch out of Splitter here. So I'm going to be using today IAC in multiple chunks. So what's interesting, by the way, about the IAC bus is when I switch chunks in Digital Performer, it's no longer spoken for. Does that make sense? If I was using IAC channels in this other chunk, which of course I was with Splitter, and I quit Splitter and I switch over to this chunk, now the IAC bus is wide open. So all 16 channels sending and receiving are now back and available, which is cool. I like the design of that. You don't have to quit Digital Performer, or, you know, it can differentiate between that. I like that about chunks that way.
Hey,
so
Matt, just real quick, there was a question in the chat that is easily sort of made clear, but what you have with Splitter is 2 separate programs running simultaneously, but they're talking to each other. So it's not actually a plug-in. Splitter is its own program that's using this built-in IAC as a method of communicating with DP.
That's exactly right. So Splitter runs as a separate app on your Mac, and it talks to it can talk to any host. It could talk to other DAWs, because the IAC is something on the Mac that's, you know, built into the OS. So everybody gets access to it. Think of it as a MIDI throughput, a bus, an internal pathway that's built into the OS. And it's fine. It doesn't have latency or anything like that. It works well. It's actually quite robust, and it's fine. I've never had any real issues with it, but that's exactly right. So now I'm able to quit the Splitter standalone app, and now we moved on. We've quit that. We're in the next example. And so what do we have here? Okay, so the first thing I added here, of course, is MOTU's polysynth, right? This is the Juno, kind of the model of our Juno, which is cool. I like this synthesizer a lot. It's got a lot of personality to it. So I've got the polysynth in here, and I added a MIDI track. Now, here's what I want to show you, something interesting. I'm using the IAC to do something with the ARP plugin. But in order to accomplish this, I needed to create a device group. Check this out. Remember something. If I add just a generic MIDI track here, here's just a generic MIDI track that I've added, and I go to the output column of the MIDI track. Down below, this shows you any device groups that you create. A device group really is a way to create think of it as a device that can control multiple MIDI channels from multiple devices, virtual instruments and hardware devices. You want to play something that's triggering 10 different keyboards and virtual instruments at the same time. Talk about stacks and layers. You know, it's a really interesting way. A device group, let's say you have different string samples, one that's sort of edgier and one that's really buttery, and you thought it'd be really nice to be able to play one instrument that combines those two elements. That would be a device group, would be a good choice for that. But notice something about this. When I take this is the polysynth virtual instrument track. I can't get to the device group. Like, it's instantiated, it's active, I can hear it, but how do I assign that virtual instrument to a device group? Well, it's interesting. I mean, in the way that they design the architecture of DP with these combined virtual instrument tracks, you would need to use an actual MIDI track. See, a MIDI track can be assigned to device groups, and a MIDI track can be assigned to virtual instruments. Right, so you're going to want, that's why you'll see here, there's this instrument track. There's another MIDI track that's also assigned. So we don't need this track. Let's get rid of it. So if I go in here to, what is this poly device group? Poly DG. I created this. Let's look at this together. So Shift I is the device group shortcut. You guys can get there from the menus here. I believe it's under here, setup, or is it in the studio? Here it is. It's down below, MIDI device group. So it's in the studio menu. So here's the, but remember, Shift I is in fact the default shortcut. So what do we have here? Normally this would be empty, and you can just create from the mini menu a new device. So here it is. And now you're thinking, what is this device going to control? When I trigger this device group, what's going to sound, right? So I click and go, well, what's available? Oh, geez, look, I have everything in my studio. My V-drums could be available. I've got the Polymax from Universal Audio. Obviously, I have the Polysynth from MOTU. All of these things. So let's say, for instance, I want the V-drums to be in this device group, but I also want the Polymax to be in this device group. And you'll be able to, you could actually, if there are default patches for hardware devices, you can see those. You can see those. That's not true in the case of virtual instruments. It is true in the case of MX4. MX4 actually has default patches, which is kind of interesting. So we don't need this group. I'll highlight this group and I'll just delete it. And so what is this device group that I've created up above here? This device group, now watch, this is interesting. It's going to Polysynth. That's MOTU's virtual instrument. But it's also going to IAC. Why is it going to IAC? Well, I'll show you what I'm doing with this. I'm gonna do like a hack where I'm gonna be able to take, what you'll see now is this MIDI track is now assigned to that device group. So in other words, as I play this device group, so I'm just playing a series of notes, and it's arpeggiating because the MIDI track that we're using here for this device group has an ARP on it. But because the MIDI track is assigned to a device group that's going to the synth and the IAC can be sent, the ARP plugin that's on this MIDI track can now be printed and sent to another virtual instrument. So who knew that MOTU's MIDI plugins can be printed or sent MIDI out to other virtual instruments at the same time? I can do it by way of IAC. I can route the MIDI plugins from MOTU that are on a MIDI track to a device group that's assigned to IAC, and then it's coming back into the program. So when I play these chords, and I go into the mixing board, so now what we want to do, of course, is put this Polymax. Now, Polymax, of course, is one of the Universal Audio native plugins, and it's cool. They have their own sort of line of virtual instruments and things, and that's part of their Spark universe there. So I'm going to close that. So I thought, well, if I'm going to use Polysynth, I'll use Polymax, and that's why I'll have my Poly DG device group. And so if I put this in record now, and we go into the mixing board, and I play a chord here, the ARP is playing the MIDI track that is assigned to Polysynth, but because the device group is assigned to IAC1, it's also triggering Polymax at the same time. And what's interesting, by the way, if I hit record, look what it did. It actually printed the notes. It's actually printing the notes that Polymax is playing. This is the ARP. It's not just a sound. This is the actual ARP. If we look at it from, we could look at it all sorts of ways. Might even just want to look at it from QuickScribe. Maybe we want to look at it that way. We want to look at it this way. Show me the Polymax. So you can print. Now, so in a lot of ways, this is a production technique, right? You could actually use MOTU's arpeggiator to arpeggiate another instrument, and not only arpeggiate the other instrument, print the arpeggiation. So IAC can be used to direct and route and print MOTU's MIDI plugins. And so if we were to do another plugin, it's like, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Now you pause for a second and go, what's the reality of this? Like, what's so interesting about that? What if you're in a situation where you're playing, they're not doing any arpeggiations of any kind whatsoever. You're simply playing the piano, but you've created a device group that's sending the MIDI to IAC. And as you're playing this MIDI performance, it's printing to another track in real time the transposed version. It could be any MIDI plugin. It could be a transpose. So when you're finished, you're literally finished playing this 10-minute piece, you can export that file. It's already printed, transposed by way of the IAC bus. So they're not going to be something you do very often, but in fact, you could print the output of those MIDI plugins in real time. And yet that might come in really handy. That might save the day in an interesting situation. So let's just do something really simple, which is we have an ARP. Let's just transpose the ARP. So if I just play the notes, it's playing Polysynth, but it's playing Polymax up an octave because one of the plugins that's being routed to the IAC is transposing it up an octave. What about changing the duration? Okay, by the way, my ARP is 16th notes. So you know what that's going to do? That's going to print 120 tick length. That's going to print the ARP at a length of 120 ticks. But what if I ran and I shortened? I said, okay, I'm going to ARP and I'm going to transpose it up an octave, and I want to cut those down less than half of their length. Why would I do that? I don't know. What if you want the notes to be really, really short because it's triggering some particular type of sound that you've created. You've created this custom synth sound. So if I hit record and I play a chord here, and we save and we go in and look at the notes, let's just go here to Shift G. Now look at the durations of these notes as compared to previously in the timeline. They're pretty subtle. But you can actually come in here and you can set these. That I actually have that turned on. Let me see here. Yeah, you can change the duration of those notes. You can print the shorter duration or longer durations of the notes. What are the other things that you could use to print? You could print an echo. You could print a groove quantize. You could print the humanize. As you're playing it, it's humanizing what's being printed. The way we did it, just really quickly to back up, because I know the routing here can be a little fuzzy when you look at it. You go, what? I don't really understand exactly what's happening here. I have a virtual instrument that happens to be MOTU. It doesn't have to be a MOTU virtual instrument, but the instrument itself can't be assigned to a device group. So I add a MIDI track that's assigned to not the instrument, assigned to a device group. The device group is also assigned to this instrument. So if I go to Shift I and I see, as you can see that it's this device group is playing polysynth and IAC, and then I have another virtual instrument where I can record the output of that IAC. And so, we're talking about MIDI out today. This definitely perfectly fits into that category. I'm sending the MIDI out from Digital Performer through IAC back into the app. It's not causing any problems. There's no latency. There's no sort of feedback or anything that's odd that happens as a result of that. So that's sort of new territory for our webinars.
Matt, can we go back one step? I think IAC in general through the chat is fascinating to people, but maybe a little bit confusing as to it. One thing is when you were in the device groups page, sorry, when you were in the device groups page, can you pull that up for a second? And then just hit the bottom arrow, just for a second to see what. So were there? Yeah. So it's a question. There was a question about the numerous iterations of IAC driver right there. Those are for different channels as outputs of IAC.
Well, the IAC is a port. Each MIDI port is 16 channels.
Right. So each of those are the ports. No, that's one port with all 16 channels for that port.
You only get one IAC port. That's it. You get one port. And for all of your Mac, so I could send, and I've done this in past webinars, I send MIDI from Digital Performer to Pro Tools. I send MIDI from Sibelius to Digital Performer through IAC. I have one port, 16 channels. And what I'm doing today with this example is as I'm playing these notes, they're going to polysynth and they're going into this internal pathway called IAC.
And in this case, you're using channel 1. And that's why we see driver -1 in the list. And when we drop down the arrow, we get only 2 through 16 because 1 is already
spoken for. That's exactly right. And then because I'm sending to this device group that's going into that IAC channel, I can, if I have a record channel assigned to that same IAC channel, it's going to go there. It's going to bus it there. It's going to send that MIDI into this port. And what's nice is that if there were no plugins on it, it would just be a one-to-one relationship. The notes would just be played. But if I put an ARP on there, I get the results. Go ahead with Mark if he has a quick question.
And that IAC driver is built right into the Apple operating system. And as long as it's instantiated within Audio MIDI setup, then you're getting it active in DP.
Right. So, and again, this is sort of interesting. I just want you guys to realize, and again, sorry, this is sort of more Mac-centric here, but interesting, though, that a device group can send to an IAC and include a MIDI plugin. So just file that away as something that you may need to do on a rare occasion. I never even knew you could do it. I thought, well, that's just going to go to the internal pathway and not go anywhere. It does get sent all the way through. Okay, so cool. We're moving on to some other, this is all kind of laying the groundwork. Now, MIDI out. This is really, really basic. And so it's only going to take a few minutes to cover this, which is something we do all day. What do we do all day? We do MIDI out by way of drag and drop. So this is just a really simple example. And of course, it all depends on how the virtual instrument was developed. And now this is not unique to Audio Unit or VST or VST3. This is for all virtual instruments that support it. So I just came up with 3 easy examples that most of you have, right? And so really quickly, and it won't go long at all. So you're listening to something. What do we have in this example? I don't know. Let's just hear it. So do we have anything playing here? Notice we got a bongo part. And so remember, and this is where stylus and the architecture and the way that you do this is different in every instrument, but you'll just have to kind of do a little research. A lot of us love and use stylus. It's been out for a very long time. It's kind of due for an update, hopefully at some point. But the idea here is that you have 8 different slots, very much similar to the way that other Spectrasonics works, whether it's Keyscape, Omnisphere, Trillion. And you come in here and go, oh, cool, let me pick from my various libraries and my sounds and so on and so forth. And you'll just see it's just right there. I can just go, well, just drag it in. Where's it going to go? Channel 2, channel 3, and so on and so forth. And you can see it says, oh, hey, it's in 4/4. Now, can I just pick it out? Do I need to keep the 4/4? No, of course not. I want to take this. It's already on the grid. It's perfectly on the grid. So I can just arrow it to the left and I highlight it and I say, oh, well, Command R, give me, 23 of those so that I can jam over that for the next few minutes and practice something. And so it's so easy, and they make it so easy to be able to just drag in. Now, it's interesting, by the way, this is where you get some fun little mistakes, little happy mistakes, which is this is the mapping for bongos 73. But if I bring in the actual slice, remember what I'm dragging here. What is this MIDI data? Why does it look like that slant? Real quick here. Basically, it's playing each of those different slices represents a different element of the percussion. See? It represents what's interesting is if I come in here, so I listen to this and go, I click on it. I'm just dragging because I want a different sound. Let's see. I like that block, that little sort of flam right there. I want that flam. On what beat is that flam? It's on beat 2. Well, let's hear it. And so you're going through here and you're muting or rearranging or changing. And what's interesting is that this is not digital audio. I mean, we're hearing it as digital audio, but the sounds themselves are triggering off as MIDI slices. MIDI slices. By the way, I always like Stylus for the fact that they keep it very human. Look, this is 9 ticks late. This isn't all hard quantized. Could I quantize it? Should I? I mean, that's definitely a question of taste. Can I change the velocities? Sure. I can treat this like I treat any MIDI. It's just that the way that they map the slices is that as it plays up this sort of ascending scale, it's playing the groove. But it's up to me to come in here and change the notes. Or like we've talked about this a million times where I come in here and say, okay, I'm going to make the grid 30-second notes. I want a little bit of a kind of a little break. I'm going to click and cut so I can hear a little kind of a fill. It sounds like some of those really cool sort of Indian grooves that you can really create depending on what you're triggering. And so obviously it's really fun to be able to drag in MIDI files and repeat them. And so it's, and as you use these in production, it gets tiresome to just take a 2-bar phrase, 4-bar phrase, whatever it is that they've created and then repeat that. It's just boring. So what you might do is come in here and say, okay, create on your important tune here, whatever, 5 different variations of those 2 bars. And you just kind of mentally remember those. Are they clippings? Maybe they're clippings. Maybe you just have them sort of mapped in such a way that, in fact, I could pack it even. I could say, oh, I bake this up and it'll be easier for me to think of this as it's packed into clips and so on and so forth. So, but that's in fact MIDI out. That's what we're covering today, right? MIDI out. And we were talking about IAC, and now we're talking about literally MIDI out by way of dragging it out of the program. So that's a real simple thing. And of course, it's something we all use. And remember, it's as generic as you make it interesting, right? It can just be really formulaic and just sound really, boring in a way. Or you can go in here and really modify it. And remember, like we were talking about Jay Oliver, who was our guest, who is a great keyboard player, producer, played a lot with Dave Weckl on those early records. And Dave Weckl, the great drummer, would play his drum set and he'd have Stylus kind of not playing the primary elements, not the kick and snare, but the other groovy, metally, hat sort of bell-ish sounds that are just tucked way under the track. Like you're hearing Dave Weckl play and he's playing some kind of a groove, and yet he's got RMX just kind of filling in the gel around the groove, and it sounds. How does he get that sound? How come he sounds like they're using these cool? It's not a trick. I mean, he's still playing great, but you're filling around it. And so if you were to take out the primary elements, I'm using the clip editor now. So, but that's the idea. So real quick, to the point of other virtual instruments, there's tons of them out there now that have drag and drop. And obviously Superior Drummer, Easy Drummer, there's all sorts of great instruments that have this technology. And I just picked 3 because the concept is the same. Well, just very quickly, Easy Drummer is one of those programs that I like because it's really affordable. I always tell people, hey, look, you're looking for a great drum sets and you're not a big programmer type. You just want good sounds. It's very good for that. It's just really nice sounding kit, They sound legit. Those toms sound really nice. And they're just, I'm not even EQing them yet. I could maybe add a little bit of compression to them. Very nice sounding acoustic kit. But I go into the browser and I just say, well, I want this. That's what I want. So just give that to me, please. That's so easy. It's so simple. Do I need to finesse it down in the timeline, repeat it, and do this, that, and the other? Nah, I think, as far as I'm concerned, the sooner I can get it out of there, the better, just so I can now manipulate it. And look at this right here, 8-bar phrase. And somebody's gone through and programmed this in such a way that look at these velocity differences. Look at these, and this is where you'd say, okay, look at these snares right here. Where's the snares? And then what you do is you look at these little ghost notes in the snare. Let me make them a little bit bigger. And so I take the loudest snare and I go, what's the loudest? Let me just highlight this and zoom in a little bit here. Okay.
You could turn off the pitch bend on the bottom.
Oh, that's okay. I'm just looking at this for a second. Okay, so let's look at this right here. My loudest snare is 125. And I wouldn't be surprised, though, if I could get more out of that. I could come in here and highlight these different snares and say, well, you know what? Change velocity in my world is V. And I'd say, oh, I want all those hottest ones to be 127, 127, and so on and so forth. And you're going through, remember, double click on the name of the note, and you'll be able to come in here and say, I want all those kick drums. They're all great with their variety, but they're all loud. Change velocity, knock those down, scale them back to 80%, 90%, and so on and so forth. And so dragging in the MIDI file. Very humanish sounding, really great for rock tracks, stuff like that. Very good. And again, maybe even if you decide to record live drums, maybe some of the elements could be kept depending on how you record the kit. You said, I love the toms. Yeah, I'm going to keep the toms. And so on and so forth. So MIDI out, one more quick example, we're going to move on, but is of course Workstation because we all have it. So the idea here is you're usually in this mode, right? Most of us are kind of in the multi-mode where we're adding elements. And if I go up into something like, look at what I'm in here, MOTU instruments. This is, again, the free content that comes with Digital Performer. And if you find yourself going, I don't have that, it's free, you have it. It's in your MOTU account. So if you log into motu.com and look at your Digital Performer registration, at the bottom, there's a sound bank from UVI that it's free. It's, a few gigabytes it's got some good stuff in it. I like the pianos and some of the grooves. So I'm in Loops Disco, yellow, which really doesn't sound that disco to me, but I can't drag it from the multi-view. I can't drag it from here. So if I go up to the main view, now I'm looking at this yellow disco groove. Now here's something interesting. It always starts off in a mode where it's dragging the audio file. That's kind of cool. I mean, again, if it sounds good, geez, why not just let it be digital audio? I can drag the digital audio file into Digital Performer. But you're like, yeah, I'd like to edit some of the MIDI notes. I want to change some of the velocities. I might even get rid of some of the notes and make it simple, make it a simpler part. How do I do that? I click on the word map. And now this octave here, octave and a half, represents the slices. So now look, I've got the drag and drop icon. It's a 2-bar phrase. So, I don't get to set that. I don't get to say, well, give me one of those bars, please, or give me longer. It just gives you what it gives you. That's what is programmed. It's nice, by the way, to have more than a bar so that you have, chances are it's going to have, it's going to sound more interesting if it's got more depth. Do I need to keep all these 4/4s? I don't need to. I'm still in 4/4. So you can always get rid of those if you need to. But now, of course, we just talked about this. What is this? In fact, it'd be funny to hear all these together here just to see how bad it could be. And why don't we add a master fader so that we can tuck this in? Looks like it could be kind of loud. But what is this guy doing here? That's the disco one. Oh, that's kind of cool. I guess it is kind of disco-y sounding. If I highlight it, Command R, give me 3 more of those. Highlight this, Command R, give me 3 more of those. And then let's just see what it could sound like. I mean, it's funny how the conga is way too loud and so on and so forth. But in fact, this is really cool. We have a really quick groove. And of course, the greatest thing about slices is that you're never, ever stuck with the tempo. That's the beauty of slices. In fact, really, that's the number one reason why they exist. Because if you were always dealing with digital audio, you'd be stuck. You go, I really like that, but it's that fast, and I just don't want to write that fast. But if at 95, now it's funny how sometimes certain grooves will kind of come unglued at a certain tempo. It's true. Why? Well, you know what it is there's so much space. They programmed it originally at 140, and you're playing it at 95 or 60, and it's just falling apart. There's too much space. So you'll just have to, you just have to work around it and go, well, you know what? We don't want to be that fast, so I'm going to find another loop. I think it's just too much of a jump. So, but this is just a very quick. It wasn't as quick as I thought it was going to be, but taking MIDI files out via drag and drop. So that's a very simple one I wanted to cover. Lots of virtual instruments do that. We could make a huge list of those, but that's the idea here. So the next thing, and we'll have time for questions, by the way, because this next section is actually interesting, but it shouldn't take super long. The next example is going over here into Falcon, because this is, in fact, what today was all about. I was inspired by the idea of using MIDI out from virtual instruments. So when you guys know when VST3 dropped, I go, what's different about the VST3 format? It has more MIDI ports. Okay, cool. What else does it do? It has MIDI output. Oh, what does that mean? It means if a developer like UVI or other companies, they write specifically for that VST3 format, there's modules or elements or ARPs or sequencers or elements of virtual instruments that create motion, movement. And now that motion inside of a virtual instrument can be sent somewhere. Well, before it couldn't be sent anywhere. Like you're using the audio unit version of Falcon, let's say, which probably many of you are, and you might want to rethink having both versions turned on if you want to use this thing. Hey, I've got this really interesting ARP inside Falcon, and it's cool. It just does its thing. I can't utilize it for other virtual instruments, but there is a way to actually utilize it, but you have to run the VST3 version. So how do we know that we're using the VST3 version? We go up to Settings, and you guys know under Audio Plugins. This plugin set is pretty old by now, but I've added a million things since. At some point, I need to update that, but it's fine. It's all my current stuff. If I type in the word Falcon in the search, so I have the VST3 version enabled. I have the AU version enabled. So that's no problem. On a Windows system, you would have just the VST3 version. And by the way, whenever you have the opportunity to use a VST3 over an older VST, always take the opportunity, unless something's just broken. If you go, there's a known issue with this particular VST3 on Windows, you have to use the VST2 or 1. But otherwise, always try to stay current and get the latest versions, because that's where they're focusing their efforts, right? Just in general, as a developer, that they're going to put all their efforts into the latest VST3 version anyway. So you want to get up with the latest version, even if it maybe cost you a tiny upgrade fee or whatever. So I've got both versions. Now, it's interesting, in Digital Performer, it can be tricky sometimes to know what's what. So I'm going to hit done, and I didn't change anything, so it's not asking me to reload anything. I go up to Project, and I go into Instrument Track, and I go down to UVI, and I go, okay, so here's my surround instances. Which one's which? Which one's AU, which one's VST? And you think, well, using my brain cells, the audio unit comes before VST in the dictionary, right, alphabetically. So the audio unit's first. Nope. It's not, which is wild. The VST publishes top. That's confusing. It's not true in the case of every virtual instrument. There's got to be a way, hopefully MOTU will make that a much, much easier thing to see. But I want to show you a more bulletproof way to do this so that you know definitively on your Mac, you're not going to get rid of the, why would you want to keep your audio unit version of Falcon? Because you've got 50 projects using the AU version. Remember, if you switch to VST3 on your Mac to Falcon and you disabled your AU, all those projects are not going to automatically get reassigned. So just Don't do that. Don't give yourself that headache. Keep them both active, but just going forward, try to use the VST3 if you want to use these different things. So here's the bulletproof way. I go up to project and I go and I add an unassigned instrument, unassigned. And then I go over here and I click and I go, oh, and look at all the virtual instruments I have on this system right now. But I come into this list and I go, Falcon, I've got a mono AU, I've got a stereo VST3, a mono VST3, and a stereo AU. Give me a VST3 stereo, please, to go. Just kidding. So I hit select, and there it is. So the bulletproof way is to add an unassigned virtual instrument and go into the chooser, and it'll tell you what's AU and what's VST. It'll tell you the difference between VST and VST3, too. So that's the bulletproof way. Or just do it like the hard knocks way, which I did, and then I make a mental note. The one in the list that's higher is the VST. As if you don't have enough to remember already, right? So we undo and save. Okay. What are we going to do with this VST? And how do we actually so I'm going to show you 3 examples. It won't take very long. You know, we'll have some time to chat here in a minute. What can we do with that? And how do we make it work in Falcon? Okay, so I'm definitely using the VST3 in Falcon. I've added it specifically. If I put this in record, what's the sound here? Let me just hit play. That's a nice sound. Maybe a little hot, but anyway, it's a good sound. So we can maybe, oh, it looks like it's already pulled back. It's pretty hot. Now, here's something interesting. When you're running the VST3 version of it, you'll see that the input, when you're in multi-record, remember we talked about being in multi-record, and so we have to make sure under Studio that multi-record is enabled. Why do we have to have multi-record turned on? Because that's how we'll be able to select the output from a VST3. The output MIDI, the MIDI output of a VST3 shows up as a MIDI input. It'll publish there. There's a known issue right now where for some reason it's dropping the assignment in Digital Performer. Our developers are fixing that. But I want you to know that here's the good news. It takes just a second to reassign it, and none of the settings get lost. So just be aware of the fact that you'll save this assigned, and you'll come back the next day and the assignment has been forgotten, but it's going to get fixed. And I wanted to show this to you anyway so you can make use of it. Once the Falcon VST3 is showing, when I put a Digital Performer into multi-record, Falcon shows up as a MIDI input. If I was using the audio unit version of Falcon, there would be no Falcon input. It's only a result of the fact that I'm using the VST3. So when I open up Falcon, here's my ARP here, this concert echo, right? Now look over here. Now today is not a huge lesson on Falcon, but it's pretty simple to do this. On the far right of the program, you'll see that you have what looks like this little 8th note icon is in fact actually the event processor browser. So it has a MIDI out sort of processor. All you have to do, and you'll see up here where it shows you, I'm in the body, and it says under event, there's a script processor. It's been designed for this patch. I can drag the MIDI out. I can drop it right in there. So it's nothing to it. I'm taking this event that's a script that's creating this animation, this motion, and I've dropped in an event called MIDI out. And what's interesting is it's taking that output and sending it to this input channel. So now that I've actually manually created this, there aren't really any presets, by the way, that have this in place. You could save your own, right? So here's my concert echo, and I could say, well, this is a factory preset. They have really nice factory presets, but I could just actually come up here and say, well, I'm just going to now save this as a program. I'd say save. I can't save the samples. I don't even think it's sample based. I think it's just, synth based. But I could save a program and put it somewhere else and call it, hey, concert echo ML or concert echo MIDI out. But here's what's cool. If I play the patch, I can trigger. I'm triggering now MX4 at the same time. What is being sent to MX4 from Falcon. That arpeggiated motion. That arpeggiated motion in that script, that event processor, is sending that MIDI data. And if I play it, I can turn this down. There's MX4. It's a pretty cool sound. What about Piano Tech? I have a Piano Tech virtual instrument. The input is set to Falcon also. If I put it in record, the output of Falcon, that processor, is going to send to both MX4 and Piano Tech at the same time. So if I go back up here and I come out here in the bar in the timeline, I hit record. I've got the notes that I played. That's great. You notice that those aren't arpeggiated. Those are just me playing a chord. These are animated and arpeggiated based on that module where the output of Falcon is now being sent back into Digital Performer, and I'm printing that. So today's lesson, which is relatively new for all of us, is I'm running a VST3. I've got this hot new virtual instrument that's a synth. Not all of them, by the way, have this. Even really good ones like Zebra doesn't have that. Not all of them do. They're getting hip to it, though. And as new versions come out, you'll see that that's becoming a thing. Everybody wants this and all the other DAWs. Everybody wants the ability to send MIDI out of each virtual instrument and do interesting things with it. By the way, you could send it out to your hardware. That's the other thing. That's why a lot of really, really big synth people, maybe even our Michael Canavan does stuff like this, where you're sending MIDI out to hardware. You could do that. So, because remember, I can send it to a hardware device that's in my MIDI configuration. But I can send it to virtual. So now you're thinking, wow, okay, Falcon has all sorts of arpeggiations that are way beyond what I can do with MOTUs. Like MOTUs is cool. It's great. It works really well. It has all these spirals and things. But the sequencers and ARPs that come within something like Falcon are kind of light years ahead of what we're doing with our MIDI plugin, and I can put them to use. So that's a pretty interesting workflow. So the next example, hopefully that's all making sense, Adam.
Yeah, I think you're doing great.
Cool.
Someone asked, do you know if Omnisphere has it built in or not?
Omnisphere 2 doesn't have it, unfortunately. Believe me, I wanted to show that. That was like the first thing. It has other ways of doing. You can drag MIDI files in for Groove. It has certain things that you can do with audio files, but it doesn't have this, which is sort of surprising in a way, because Omnisphere is such a leading synth. You know, we all love Omnisphere. It's like the desert island synth in a lot of ways, but it doesn't have this output yet. Maybe Eric will add that here in the next version. Okay, so we're going to go over here to another example, just so you guys can see, and it's my way of sort of giving back to these companies that have given me, and this is one that sadly Bo gave me. You know, Bo was always so generous and so kind about hooking me up with great instruments, and so this is a shout out to Bo. Here's SynthMaster 3. So, again, you'll see that we're just going to have to, until this gets addressed, we're just going to quickly assign these, and I haven't lost anything, and it only took a couple seconds to fix that. But in this instrument, so here's SynthMaster, which is a really, really interesting here. You look at this. KV331 Audio is the developer of this really interesting synth. And this is brand new. This is the latest version, has MIDI out VST3. How do we do it? Well, let's just put in record here. So it's one of those kind of cool ARPs, right? It's great sounding. All we have to do, and you have to, I was able to quickly figure this out. I go into the track view. This particular patch is made up of kick, hat, and ARP. If I go to the voice tab in the ARP, now look over here, MIDI IO. That's it. Each, sometimes you'll see in the next example, the last example I have for you, that it's a little bit more, it's more difficult to get to it. This is easy. I take the ARP, that's what I want. Do I want the hat and the kick? I mean, I could, but I'm just going to say, go to voice, under ARP, set the output channel to MIDI channel 1. That's the input. That's the output. Okay, it's assigned. What can I do with it? Well, I'm going to send it to Baby Audio. This is another great virtual instrument. And so if I put this into record and I play a sound for synth, I'm not just playing the notes from for Baby Audio. It's getting that ARP MIDI pattern. What does it sound like? And look, I transposed it. I think I'll take the transpose off. Keep it nice and low. By the way, I wouldn't have to transpose it necessarily up an octave. We could do something like a fifth. Let's just see, fourth. We'll do G4. Oh, that's cool. So what is it actually getting? Isn't that interesting? Sometimes it's hard to differentiate between what's MIDI, what's maybe potentially an effect. All right, so let me just try it here. Turn the click on to there's the notes. There's the ARP coming out of SynthMaster 3, MIDI out, VST3, triggering Baby Audio, printing that ARP in real time. What about, I'm triggering Falcon as well. Okay, what is this sound going to do? Well, I guess it's pretty loud. I really hadn't tweaked it very much. Yeah, I don't know if I'm in love with that particular sound, but it's the same concept, right? It's the same concept. Whatever virtual instrument I'm running, I can send the ARP into that virtual instrument. It could be sent to hardware. It could be sent to virtual. It can be sent to any virtual instrument of any type, right? VST, audio unit. So this is an interesting thing. I want you guys to sort of run with this and do some really interesting things with the ARPs and sequencers inside VST3s and really go with it. The last example, and we're kind of nearing the finish line here, is a company called Cherry Audio makes, and for those of you who are synth enthusiasts, this is really a great plugin, and it's called Voltage Modular. Voltage Modular. So let's just reconnect real quick. It just takes a minute. And save. So this is a little bit more interesting, and you have to kind of really get your hands dirty a little bit to understand what's happening with this particular synth. So this is really a full-on, control voltage synth, right? This is a modular synth. So this is in fact a preset that I modified. So I went into their browser and found one called Basic ARP, which was not sending out through MIDI. It wasn't. But I found out that, of course, this program is brand new and it does support VST3 MIDI out. But you just have to do a couple quick things. And here's what you had to do. Now watch. All of these various ARPs. I look in fact over here at the arpeggiator. The arpeggiator itself doesn't have MIDI out. It has CV outs, control voltage. But what's really cool is that there, if you search in here, and here I'll go kind of down a little ways here, there is a CV to MIDI module. This program is, again, for somebody who's really into synthesis. I like synths. I just don't have time necessarily to always really build things from scratch, but I think it's cool. I wish I had more time to build stuff from scratch. People are really into this world. I can create a module, I can add it where it converts control voltage to MIDI. And so here's what it looks like. CV, and by the way, up here at the top, you can kind of make the cables a little go away. So you can really see what's happening here. But essentially, I'm taking the gate and in the actual, we're taking the CV out and the gate out are being sent to this module. So, because I can't do anything with it directly as control voltage, but I can send it into their little converter program. Then I can take the MIDI out of the actual CV to a MIDI out module. So there is a module in here called, where are you, Mr. MIDI out? Here it is, MIDI output. So I'm sending the MIDI out from the CV to MIDI converter to the MIDI out. And then what's cool is that I can set the channel and I can set it to send the MIDI back into Digital Performer. So by the way, if there were other things that you wanted to do to convert CV to MIDI, you can send clock, tempo, and stuff like that. But the idea here is that now that I have wired the converter and the MIDI out back into Digital Performer, I can play it now. So here's what it sounds like. Let me just play it by itself. Now, if I wanted to put this into record and play a note, let me make sure that, of course, that I've got this in play. So I'm using that MIDI out module to send the MIDI into MOTU's polysynth. I could send it into, let me take this out. This is another baby audio synth. It's funny, it sounds a little sort of out of tune right now, but you guys get the idea here, that you understand the concept, which is it's just a little bit more involved with something like this because you have to create a couple modules to get the CV out. But the bottom line is, as you're starting to shop for VSTs, we're going into the fall here. Everybody knows everything goes on sale around Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Wait to buy something because everything's going to go on sale, right? And then you're going to think about, you're going to be Googling VST3 MIDI out, VST3 MIDI out. Go to YouTube, type in VST3 MIDI out, and you'll find virtual instruments that have this, and you'll see people with Ableton and other DAWs doing it. Do we support it? Yeah, we support it. We support it. Just make sure that it's turned on, and then the output will publish. And now I'm able to capture sequencers and ARPs and use them for other things. Thanks, everybody. Good to see you all, and have a wonderful weekend.